Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today on this webinar. We're here with Dr. Tom Phelan, the creator of the 123 Magic program. We're going to be talking about the 6 biggest ways that kids push back and what you can do about it. So before we get started, just a couple of quick housekeeping things. We are using a new technology this time. So if it looks a little bit different than the Facebook Live chats we've done in the past, that's why. So we'd love to hear from you how this works for you. Because this is a webinar and not a Facebook Live, we are going to be able to send you a replay once the webinar is over. So if you'd like to watch it again, you want to watch it with your spouse or partner, that's terrific. Also, for anyone who wasn't able to make it live today, they'll be getting a link to the replay as well. And we'll be sending you a free downloadable cheat sheet going over some of the topics that we discussed today. So Dr. Phelan, welcome. Thank you so much.
Let's do it. Thank you. We're going to talk about a subject today that's very dear to parents' hearts, and that is kids' pushback, or what we often call testing and manipulation. And what I found over the years is that parents have a hard time understanding testing and manipulation. And if we can get you to understand the basics of it, how it works, the basic dynamics and so on, that understanding or that insight points the direction directly to some useful ways of managing it. So let's start with looking at 3 behaviors that are favorites of parents. The first one is pouting. You've all been familiar with this. The second one is whining. Whining is like the big sister of pouting. It's a little more aggressive than pouting. And finally, something that all parents have had experience with, and that is tantruming. Tantruming can be one of the most upsetting forms of testing and manipulation for parents. So if we look at these things, pouting, whining, and tantruming, what do these 3 behaviors all have in common? Well, you might say they're all obnoxious. That's certainly the case. But there's something else, and that is they are forms of pushback. Each in their different way is a different form of testing and manipulation. So where does testing and manipulation come from? Is it inevitable? Why do kids do it? Let's take a look at that and search for that basic understanding here. Good parents, according to the research, are what we call authoritative. And authoritative means they are both warm and demanding. And what that means is that you have a warm side to your parenting equation, and that's where you take care of the kids, you feed them, you're nice to them, you hug them, they hit their thumb with a hammer, you comfort them, you read them a story before bed. That's the warm side of parenting. But there's also a demanding side of parenting. And what that means is I'm your parent, I expect something from you. I expect you to listen to your teacher. I expect you to work hard. I expect you to be nice to your brother and your sister, and so on. That's the demanding side. So if you're putting your kids to bed, reading them a story before bed is the warm side of parenting. But 9 o'clock is bedtime. And at 9 o'clock, your child says, how about another story? You say no, because it's 9 o'clock. That's the demanding side of parenting. So you have that, it's almost like a faucet you have to turn on and off if you're a parent. So where does testing come in? Well, when we parents are in the demanding mode, not the warm side, but the demanding mode, that's where we get the kids' pushback. Because when we're saying it's time for bed, no, you can't have the half donut right before dinner. You can't torture your little sister and so on. We're frustrating a child. And when a child is frustrated, they have 2 choices. They can either test and manipulate, or they can cooperate. So testing, when they choose it, means that I'm not choosing to cooperate, I'm choosing to test. And testing is a purposeful behavior, and we'll look at the purposes of testing in just a second here. And finally, when a child decides not to cooperate and to test, they have 6 choices. So let's first look at the purposes of testing. What are the purposes of testing? Children's 2 goals with testing and manipulation are, number 1, to get their way, and number 2, to get effective revenge. The get their way part has been obvious to parents for years and years and years. You know, kids have a temper tantrum because they didn't get their way and they want to get their way. And that certainly is the major goal of testing and manipulation. But what a lot of us miss some of the time is that testing can have a second goal, and that is to get effective revenge. Doesn't mean your kids are sick, they're going to grow up to be professional criminals, wind up in jail. It's just a normal human response. You do something bad to me, I'm going to do something bad back to you. So when you are frustrating your kids, being on the demanding side of parenting, they often want to get back at you. And we'll talk about how revenge plays out in the process of testing and manipulation. So these two goals, getting their way, getting effective revenge, very important. So that's the purposes of testing. What are the different types of testing? The first type of testing is badgering. This is the why, please, 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 just this once, just this once, just this once, mom. Some kids could have been machine guns in the last war. They do this stuff, and it's especially embarrassing when it's in the grocery store line. Second type of testing is temper. Child may say, I hate you. I had a parent come in once, a very worried mom. She had a 4-year-old, and she said, I said, why are you here? And she said, my 4-year-old the other day, when she was mad at me, said, I'm going to kill you. Now, this is a 4-year-old. This is not an unusual comment, and it is testing and manipulation, but the mom didn't know that. You won't believe what she did. She went to the kitchen. She went to the knife drawer. She took out a big butcher knife, and she went and knelt down across from her little girl. She handed the girl the knife, and she said, do you want to kill me? And the little girl raised the knife over her head and then started putting it down, and they both started crying. Well, mom's experiment was to determine, is my little girl a homicidal maniac, and does she really want to kill me? Well, it backfired totally. The mom came in totally petrified because she totally overreacted. She didn't understand that this was testing and manipulation. It wasn't a sincere homicidal urge. Third type of testing and manipulation is called threat. I'm not going to do my homework. I'm not going to eat my dinner. I'm going to run away from home. Something bad is going to happen if you don't give me what I want. And sometimes kids these days will say, I'm going to kill myself. And it seems to be a favorite that's getting more popular with children. 6 types of testing and manipulation. Number 4. Number 4 is martyrdom. Martyrdom is crying, pouting, looking sad, looking teary, saying stuff like nobody loves me anymore, and that kind of thing. Now, martyrdom may be the most popular among kids, and it may be the most difficult for parents to handle because it inspires the emotion of guilt. Each type of testing and manipulation is intended to inspire a difficult emotion in parents, and then, of course, the way the parent can get rid of the unpleasant emotion is to give the child what they want. But a lot of parents have a guilt button the size of the state of Wyoming, and so when these kids press it, they often get what they want, and that's martyrdom. Now let's take a look. We've gone through the first 4 types. Before we get into the last 2, let's talk about what's going on here with testing and manipulation. What's the underlying dynamic? What's going on is that when a child is testing, what they're basically saying to you is, look, mom and dad, you are frustrating me, you are driving me crazy by not giving me what I want. You're not giving me the half donut before dinner, you're making me go to bed, you're counting me, you're making me stop teasing my sister and all that. But now I am frustrating you back by my badgering, temper, threat, and martyrdom. Now that we're both frustrated, you call off your dogs and I'll call off mine. I'll make you a deal. You give me what I want and I'll knock this stuff off. And as many of you know, if you do give the child what they want at that moment, they will knock off the bad behavior. And so a lot of parents say, gee, that's great. There's a way to get rid of testing and manipulation. Well, there certainly is, but there's a big drawback, and that is who's running your house. It's not you anymore. It's the child who's running the house. The next tactic number 5, is the only one of the 6 where the child makes you feel good first. So the kid says, you're the prettiest mom on the whole block, you're the best mom in the whole world. I'm going to go up and clean my bedroom. It's been looking kind of messy for the last 3.5 years, and then maybe I'll take a look at the garage. Now something nice is going to happen. But in order for you to get this nice thing, you have to give the child what they want. So butter up often happens before a possibly frustrating event. And then we go from the nicest to the worst. The 6th tactic is physical tactics. So it could be breaking things, physically attacking you, running away. This little boy here whose parents came to me, he was running the house. And so they called him King Louis the 14th. That's why he's got the garb on. And the first time they counted him out and put him in his room for a rest period, he destroyed the entire room. So that's King Louis at work using tactic number 6, physical tactics. Now, some of you, I bet a lot of you, at least 50% of you could guess what's kids' all-time favorite tactic over all the years, which tactic they use most frequently. And you'd probably guess it. It starts with the letter W, and it's called whining. Whining drives parents insane, often getting kids their way. Whining is a combination tactic of number 4, martyrdom, and number 1, badgering. So with the badgering, you get the repetitive nature of whining, and with the martyrdom, you get the I want you to feel sorry for me nature of the testing and manipulation. So when you think about it, and we're trying to, get this basic insight about testing and manipulation, where does it come from? Well, it comes from demanding parenting. What are its purposes? Revenge and getting my way. What forms does it take? We just talked about the 6 forms. So testing and manipulation is extremely aggravating to parents. It's also an evolutionary skill, which may sound a little funny to you, but it's ingrained in kids. It's something that happens naturally. I've had a lot of parents say to me, this kid, he's got to be so smart. He's only 2 or he's only 3. And look at the kind of things he's doing to try and get his way. It doesn't take any brains at all, I can assure you. And this testing and manipulation in our kids is not as bad as it is in some other animals. Some animals, some baby birds will kick their siblings out of the nest and literally kill them. There are sharks where the mom shark has 2 stomachs and each is filled with eggs. And as the eggs hatch, all the sharks eat each other till where you have only 1 baby shark left in each stomach. So this is tough stuff. I mean, the humans are look like angels compared to animals in this way. But it's an evolutionary skill. It's bred into the kids. It's part of evolution. And evolution, testing and manipulation is not a sign of bad parenting. I've had lots of parents over the years when their kids acted up and gave them a hard time. The parent thought the parent was doing something wrong. It's not the case. It's just kids being normal children. If your kids didn't do this, they would not be normal. Testing manipulation also is caused by good parenting, usually the demanding part of parenting equation, and it's parents setting limits. So it's caused by good parenting, but it can be aggravated by bad parenting, like you see in this picture here. If a parent gets all upset about the testing, you're sure that it's going to get worse and you're going to have a harder time managing it. So when a parent gets upset and bad parenting is involved, what's happening? What the parent is communicating, and this mom here is unfortunately communicating to her children when they are testing and manipulation, is 2 things that the kids appreciate immediately. Mom is saying, number 1, you are driving me crazy. And number 2, I have no idea what I'm doing. Now, what's wrong with these? What's wrong with these are, number 1, you are driving me crazy is a perfect way to satisfy the revenge motive in your child. Remember, they're mad at you because you didn't give them something. You're in the demanding parenting mode. So they do something back. You say you're driving me crazy. They feel good about achieving effective revenge. What about the I have no idea what I'm doing? What that tells the kids is there's hope that they might get their way. If you have no idea what you're doing, well, I'm sure not running the house, the kid's thinking, and maybe I'm going to be able to get my way because you haven't a clue what's up. So what we're going to talk about a number of times is when you're handling testing and manipulation, you want to be calm and decisive. If you feel like this poor mom feels, you're not going to do anything that's very helpful. So what to do about testing and manipulation? We've looked at what it is, how it works, the different forms, what its purposes are, and so on. There are 4 things we're going to look at here. One is, once testing occurs, you want to recognize and label what it is. Number 2, there's nothing like testing and manipulation to trigger some really dumb conversations between parents and kids. And unfortunately, these conversations can escalate into nasty affairs and even child abuse. Number 3, we're going to show you how to ask the $1 million question. And this is a way of doing a diagnostic on your own house and on your own kids to see what kind of testing and manipulation they are involved in and what this says about how you need to handle it. And number 4, we'll talk about several options you have for managing testing calmly and decisively. So you're going to recognize testing. How do you do it? The first thing, when you get a difficult behavior from your child, look for a recent frustrator. That's a sign of your being on the demanding side of the parenting equation. And the three things that come up most often are kid wants a thing and you don't want to give it to him. So it could be the donut before dinner. It could be an iPad that you're using and you don't want them to use it. It could be a lot of different things. Second thing is a child wants an activity. They want to go outside and play, but you think they should stay in for dinner, or they have to practice, or they have to do something else. They want to go over to a friend's house, but it's not the time to do it. They want to sleep over at a friend's house, but it's a school night. And that's a recent frustrator. You didn't want them to do it. And the third thing is the child does not want to do an activity. Classic example here, if you've been a parent very long, you know this is kids don't want to do what? Go to bed. And after not wanting to go to bed, the next worst thing is they don't want to stay in bed. They don't want to eat. They don't want to take a bath, take a shower, brush their teeth, and do all those kinds of things. So these are the three most common types of frustrators that you get into with your kids when you're frustrating them because you are being the demanding parent at that moment. So that's one clue that we've got testing and manipulation. There was a recent frustrator. You said no, not too long ago in the past. Then you want to label the behavior. It's very, very important to label the testing. You remember, testing could be just one of these things, or it could be a combination of it. So it could be badgering by itself. It could be temper. It could be butter up. Butter up's pretty easy to recognize. It could be martyrdom. But what is it? When your child does it, label it. Put a label on it, and either an individual label or like whining. Whining is a 41 pattern. It's a 4 and a 1, badgering and martyrdom put together. Label the behavior. The reason for this is if you don't label the behavior, you may take it seriously. And if you take it seriously, you're going to be in big trouble, as we'll see in just a minute here. Avoid really silly conversations. Now, labeling testing means you will avoid some of these really stupid conversations. You have a 12-year-old girl and you frustrate her for some reason or another and don't let her do something, and she says, "I never get anything." Very common comment we get from kids. "I never get anything." Okay, this should be labeled as number 4, martyrdom. A little bit of temper maybe in there as well. Maybe it's a 24 or 42 pattern, but she says, "I never get anything." Now, if you label this in your mind as testing and manipulation, you may wind up saying nothing. You may walk away or whatever. But what if you take it seriously and you don't label it as testing and manipulation? So she says, "I never get anything," and you say, "What? You never get anything? Do you have clothes on? Is there a roof over your head? Am I not making dinner for you in 25 minutes? You just took her comment seriously and responded to it. And now what do we have? We have a really dumb conversation. What's the problem with these conversations? They tend to escalate. So you start talking, then you're trying to persuade her to see things your way, then you're arguing, now you're both screaming, and boom, you sometimes run into physical encounters or child abuse. So labeling testing means you can avoid these things escalating into something more horrible. Okay, I talked before about diagnosing your own home. What's going on in your own house? And what can you do about it? So we're going to talk about the $1 million question, or who's pushing your buttons? Are you going to make a diagnosis of what's going on in your own home? The question, the $1 million question, is not who's pushing your buttons, it's do they have a favorite tactic? Think of your kids one at a time and think of the 6 types of testing and manipulation. And with each kid and with that list, ask yourself, does this child have a favorite tactic? Okay, is it badgering? Is it martyrdom? Is it butter up? Butter up is not usually a favorite tactic, but do they have a favorite tactic? Now, if they do have a favorite tactic, I always ask audiences when I'm doing a seminar, if they do have a favorite tactic, is that a good thing or a bad thing? And a lot of people say, oh, it's a good thing because at least you know what it is. Well, not quite. If the child does have a favorite tactic, it's a bad thing normally. Why? Because it must be working. And you remember from just a few slides back, if a testing tactic is working, what does that mean? It means it's either getting the kid their way or it's getting them effective revenge. So If it's working, it's getting them their way or getting effective revenge. So what we have to do then is take a look at, okay, how are you responding to them when they badger you? How are you responding when they throw a temper tantrum? How are you responding when they make some kind of threat? Your job is tough because you can't give them away and you can't give them effective revenge. And when I work with parents on this, if we talk about a child and he has a favorite tactic like tantrums or whatever, invariably the kid's either getting their way, they're getting effective revenge, and sometimes they get both in sequence, which is like the most horrible way you could possibly handle the situation. So the parent will try not to give them their way, and then the kid will get worse and blow up even worse than they were before. So they're getting their revenge, and then the parent gets sick of it, and then they give them their way. So they got revenge, and then they got their way. I mean, that's a big cake, big chocolate cake to feed to the child, and they get major reinforcement for the testing and manipulation. So for parents, this is tough for us because we really got to think on our feet. Is this testing and manipulation? Yes. What kind is it? Okay. How am I going to respond to it? I can't give them away. I can't give them effective revenge. We'll talk about specific positive tactics for managing it in just a second. So you label the testing. You can't reinforce it. You're not going to give them effective revenge. You're not going to give them their way. Once the testing has started, how are you going to manage it? And here are the tactics that we're going to talk about: ignoring, distracting, disappearing, counting, in a sort of general other category. When you're using all these tactics, you cannot whimper. Whimpering is come on, honey, this is not very good. We can't go on like this. Come on, dear. Why don't you try and cooperate with mommy or daddy for a while? We want you to be calm and decisive. So let's look first at ignoring. Ignoring means, really, people say ignore, they're often not very good ignorers because they keep talking and they maintain eye contact. When I talk about ignoring, I mean no eye contact and no talking. You simply ignore it. This is not real pleasant with a kid who is a persistent badgerer, and you may want to use other tactics with them as well. But this mom here, she's looking straight ahead. She's not looking at the kid who's doing the badgering and so on, and she's doing a good job of ignoring, but it can be real tough. Distraction. A lot of people are big on distraction, and distraction can work very well, especially with the little kids. They're a year old, 2 years old, 3 years old, and so on. There are two problems with distraction. One is, as these kids get on to 3 and 4 some of the time, and they're having a tantrum about not getting a cupcake, and you say, come on, honey, let's go look at the horsey, or let's go on the swing. They know what you're doing, and they get madder because at that age, they start to learn that you're sort of trying to play a trick on them, and they're not going to let you get away with it. The other thing is your tone of voice. If your tone of voice reflects anxiety, anger, or like you don't know what you're doing, distraction is not going to work very well. The kids will see through it, and it tends to backfire. But in many cases, it can be a very useful tactic. You can disappear. Some kids, you can put them in a pack and play, you can put them in their room for a while, and you just walk away where you're out of sight and unable to respond to whatever they are saying. You may still hear it, but you're not responding to it. You could use counting. Now, we're not going to get into the details of counting today from 1, 2, 3 Magic, but counting is perfect. I've said this so many times. Counting is perfect for something like whining. That voice, that scratchy, martyr-like voice that drives you absolutely insane. A quick count of 1 or 2 will often put a stop to that if you also do not talk and do not get into begging the kid to knock it off and so on and so forth. But counting can be very effective if it's done well. Some other tactics, then, these are tactics that I've actually used with parents, and I should say that a little differently. I think these are tactics that a lot of parents have told me that they've been using. I've had a number of moms who, when the kid is testing and manipulation, they will lock themselves in the bathroom. And one response to that from other parents is, well, gee, then your kid's running all over the house. Isn't this kind of dangerous? And the moms say, no, they're usually banging on the door, but I'm in there and I'm not going to reinforce their testing and manipulation. One tactic, I have to say, I've never recommended it, but I've heard some really funny stories about it working well, is where the parent, you got to be young enough to be able to do this, child's tantruming, parent will actually get down on the floor and tantrum along with the child. What this will sometimes do is get both people laughing, and then the tantrum is terminated. And some parents have felt that it was a kind of a lesson that they thought that the kids saw how stupid it looked, somebody tantruming, and that they tended not to use that tactic so much in the future. Another tactic, this is popular with people who like how to talk so kids will listen, is sympathetic listening. Boy, I know it's really hard for you when I don't give you the half a donut right before dinner. And along with that is the next item. Wouldn't it be nice if you could have that donut right now? Is to sort of sympathize with the child. And sometimes this will work, sometimes it'll backfire. So you have to kind of experiment a little bit with your kids to see which is going to be the best way of handling it. And a lot of people ask me, okay, so, when can you talk to your kids about what's going on if they're testing and manipulating and so on? One thing you can do is before saying no to them about something, when you're in your demanding mode, you can give one brief, firm, decisive explanation of why you can't eat the half donut now because you're going to ruin your dinner. We're eating in 15 minutes. But you only say that once. And if that doesn't do the trick, then you're going to use some of the other tactics that we've talked about. The other thing, if you recall, we talked about kids not getting a thing, not getting an activity. But the third thing on that list, you remember, was the child didn't want to do an activity. This is harder for parents. So you say it's time to get ready for bed and the child tantrums. And what are you going to do with that? You can't use counting because it's bedtime, and that's what we call a start behavior. So if your problem is kids tantruming about positive behaviors or start behaviors, what you want to do is you want to set up a routine for bedtime, for eating, for doing homework or whatever, and you want to rehearse that routine at a time when the routine is not in fact being implemented, when they don't in fact have to do it. So if you're getting regular bedtime tantrums, what you want to do is rehearse the basic bedtime method, which may involve reading stories and the child getting ready on their own and then checking in with you. And then the kids go to bed, and then of course they don't like to stay in bed a lot of times. So you want to rehearse what we call the cut them off at the pass method. And so you can use that instead of running into testing and manipulation at bedtime and not knowing what to do with it. So there's a number of tactics you can use with testing and manipulation. First thing, remember, you always got to label it. And basic to all this is the idea that kids can read your tone of voice. So if you did a tape recording of you when you're talking to your child about testing and manipulation or whatever, and you could listen to your tone of voice, what would that voice say? What we don't want it to say is what's happening to the mom on the left. And the voice is saying, you are driving me crazy and I haven't the slightest idea what to do. What you do want your voice to say is, I'm ready for anything. I'm ready for anything. Whatever you do, I love you, and we're going to handle this as best we can. And so the parent is calm, they're decisive, and they have a plan. They know exactly what they're going to do. For those of you who are interested, a lot of the things that we've been talking about here are in 123 Magic, and they are in fact in Chapter 10. Chapter 10 is 6 kinds of testing and manipulation, and it'll go through some of these things. It's a good reference for this particular talk. Now, before I stop, I want to tell you one story that kind of highlights some of what we've been talking about. This is a true story. It has to do with a couple that came in to see me a number of years ago. And they said, Dr. Phelan, we have a 5-year-old, and this 5-year-old is hell on wheels. He is tantruming multiple times a day. 2 or 3 times a day, he'll tantrum about just about anything. Our household is miserable, and we don't know what to do. And so I said, okay, would you like to learn 123 Magic? And they said, we'll do anything. And so I taught them 123 Magic, went through the whole thing, took us a couple of sessions, and then they thought they were ready. So I said, well, go home now, and I want you to use this program. They went home, they started using it, and we had a follow-up appointment in about 2 weeks from this visit. They came back in 2 weeks, they sat down. I was looking at their faces trying to see, are things good, bad, or whatever. And I couldn't really tell. And so I said, well, how are things going? And the mom said, "We can't tell." And that's an unusual response in my business. We can't tell. I said, "What do you mean you can't tell?" They said, "We went home from that last session, and our 5-year-old was there, and we told him what we were going to do, and he hasn't had a tantrum since." And the amazing thing about this, I think, is that that little boy picked up from mom and dad that they were ready for him. They were no longer anxious. They were no longer worried. They knew exactly what they were going to do, and so on. And he sensed that in their manner and in their behavior. And he knew he was no longer going to get anywhere by doing his testing and manipulation. Now, I am not implying in any way that that's going to happen for all of you by using this program, because that is atypical. That is unusual. But that's your goal. That's where you want to get. It usually doesn't happen that suddenly, but that's what you're shooting for in the long run. So there you have it. There's a look at testing and manipulation. You kind of understand what it is. You know the different types. You know the purpose of it, and you have some ideas how to manage it. What we're going to do now is take a look at some questions that may have come in.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Phelan. That was fantastic. I myself have a 20-month-old and an almost 5-year-old at home. And so there, a lot of that very much resonated with me. So some questions that we've gotten. The first one is, my 6-year-old has recently gotten into spitting. What should we do about that?
Okay. And spitting is not necessarily testing and manipulation. It could be if there's been a recent frustrator, you know, how you do the analysis that we talked about before. But it could be an expression of frustration. It could be experimentation. It could be a lot of different things. The first thing is a hostile kind of spitting, and what's he doing it for? Is he spitting at people and so on? So there could be sort of an innocent spitting, walking down the street spitting. I wouldn't worry too much about that. But if he's doing it at people, then I would be a little more, or maybe a little more concerned. I don't think it's a big problem. Spitting, though, is counting is perfect for spitting. So if you get a child who's going to be doing that and they spit, that's one. Okay. And it could even be an automatic 3, what we talk about in the 1, 2, 3 magic system. So they spit in your face, they're gone. It's going to be an automatic 3, and you're going to have a timeout of rest period of 15 minutes or something like that. But I would use counting for that. And the same rules apply to, I mean, spitting is gross. It turns people off. It infuriates parents and so on. But don't forget that calm and decisive. Your tone of voice says a lot. And so even with something like that, you want to be handling it in a firm, gentle, and non-hysterical manner.
Got it. Okay, great. Okay, so we talked about whining earlier. My 4-year-old, when she whines, her voice drives me absolutely insane. That's fair, mine too. It's worse than fingernails on a chalkboard. I get so mad so quickly that I'm afraid I don't handle things very well. So what would you, I'm guessing mom here, what would you tell this mom?
And how old is the child?
4.
4, okay. What I would tell her, again, I'm going to go back to counting, because counting is perfect for whining. So the best thing when you're being driven crazy by a child's behavior, the best thing is knowing in advance that you have a way of handling it. And so if you have a way of handling it and you know what it is, you know, for one thing, you're not going to have to listen to it very long. Because if she hits a 3, she's going to be going for rest period and so on, and so on. The other thing, when the kids are 4, maybe a little bit young, but one of the other things I didn't mention before is you can sit down with your kids and you can have a family meeting. And here's what you do at the family meeting. What you do at the family meeting is you make a chart and you put the 6 different kinds of testing and manipulation on the chart. And so then you show this to all the kids. Right? Okay, guys, I want you to look at this. Now, I each want you to tell me, what is your favorite tactic? And we're going to decide what's your favorite tactic as well. And then we're going to open our pieces of paper and read and see who's got what favorite tactic.
I see you. I know what you're doing.
And that can be a great preventer of testing behavior, because then the kids will start using it on each other. And then after that, guess what the kids are going to do? Mommy, what's your favorite tactic? Or, Daddy, what's your favorite tactic?
I don't think I want to answer that.
I know, but it's a good way to get the whole family involved. It's just part, it's part of human life. It's part of human nature. But it is funny, but it also holds people accountable for their behavior, because we're implying the testing is kind of not exactly a dirty trick, but it's not an open, honest, give and exchange communication. It's manipulation. It's emotional manipulation.
Yeah.
And so let's call a spade and deal with it.
Yeah. Okay, great. So how could I apply this to intervening with my boys who are 3 and 5 who bicker and fight about their toys? And then Kathy says, thanks, I continue to apply 1, 2, 3 magic. It works when I'm consistent. So it sounds like Kathy is familiar with the program. Thank you, Kathy. And she's wondering how to apply this with her 3 and 5-year-old sons who bicker and fight about their toys.
Yeah. Well, we're now into sibling rivalry. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be, you have the rivalry itself, and then you have some of the testing and manipulation that can be an offshoot of it if you're trying to intervene. And usually for sibling rivalry, we have several rules. One is when the kids are fighting and you're using counting, say, or even if you're not, you hold both of them accountable for what happened, unless one was the obvious unprovoked aggressor and you're totally sure. But you have to be very careful, because by now, if you've been a parent very long, kids are tricky.
They're so tricky. They're so tricky.
You can be there the whole time, as you can see the whole thing, and you still can't tell who started it. My favorite story is I had a family once, and there was a boy and a girl, and this little girl used to love to set her brother off by giving him a hug, because she knew that he didn't like hugs, and that he'd tantrum if she hugged him. And so here she'd look like Miss Goody Two-Shoes. She'd go up and hug him, and then the parents would get mad at the boy for having a temper tantrum because she hugged him. And I said, no. I said, what you should be doing is counting the girl, because that's an obvious aggressive
She's doing it on
tease.
purpose.
Yeah, she started it. So anyway, you count both, and then the other thing we do is you never ask the world's stupidest question. No, who started it? Or what happened, because you're going to get heated. So that's the way to handle sibling rivalry. Then if you feel there's testing and manipulation afterwards, then you can look at the tactics. If the kid's coming up with something that's really ridiculous and they're presenting it to you, if the child is saying to you, I really think she's coming around giving me too many hugs, I really don't like that. That's not a manipulative thing. That's time for, I think, for a fair negotiation, for a give and take, and maybe sit them both down or sit down one at a time and talk it over and try and come up with a plan.
Okay, great. So next question, what can you do with a child that has, it says ADHD, so that might be ADHD, and compulsive behavior?
Well, you're not going to do a whole lot. I mean, what ADHD is going to add to the equation is intensity and frequency. So you're going to get these kids, they're going to be more difficult to manage. And what you also get with ADHD, you're not going to get much butter up. You're going to get a lot of temper, and you'll get a lot of badgering. These kids are very persistent and so on. You may get martyrdom from time to time, but you're going to get the more aggressive tactics, which is badgering, martyrdom, physical tactics. A lot of ADHD kids are going to wreck their room or break something around the house. So it's the same testing and manipulation, but the ante's been upped, a bit. And so your tactics, you're going to have to use the same kind of tactics. I would also look, if you have an ADHD child and they're on medication, look at your medication possibilities, because a lot of the meds, a lot of you have heard me say this before, a lot of the meds, they call them all-day medications, but all day is not. Last I heard, all day was 24 hours. These meds last how much? 7, 8, 9 hours. So they cover like the morning and the school day. And then when your child comes back home from school, what do you have left? You have an unmedicated kid with ADHD.
And probably tired parents and exhausted siblings, sure.
Yep. So I think it's another thing you can do with those children is to reevaluate the medication situation. Sometimes you can get a longer acting form of a stimulant. Sometimes you can do a booster dose of a stimulant. So you anticipate when the first one's going to run out, and then you back up on the clock a half hour before that, and you take a booster dose. And then you, of course, watch their sleep to make sure that it's not causing any kind of, insomnia or interference with their going to bed at night.
Okay. All right. Great. How do you handle and put a stop to lying? And this particular question is coming from the parent of a 4-year-old.
Oh, okay. Well, it's a good question. And lying is a little different from testing and manipulation. There are 2 reasons that kids lie. And the first reason is to impress people. Now, that's the minority of the lying incidents. The most common reason that people lie, children and maybe adults too, is to get or stay out of trouble. So they're covering up a misbehavior. And so you say to your child, on Monday you got a 12-year-old kid in 7th grade. You got your homework done? Yep. Tuesday, got your homework done? Yep. Wednesday, got your homework done? Yep. Friday, the teacher calls, said he hasn't done any homework all week. And so you say, how could you possibly lie to me and all this sort of thing? Well, what we do with lying is first, just like we did here, we want to get a perspective on lying. The percentage of 4-year-olds that lie is something like 80%.
Okay.
And it's up from 2-year-olds, which is like 20%. And why? Because of the cognitive development.
Sure.
4-year-olds can envision saying something to you like, that covers up. If I say this to you, you may not know what really went on.
Yeah.
16-year-olds, it's down from that. But 4-year-olds are known for having one of the highest lying rates in the universe.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. So first of all, your kid's normal. And so what you do is that the worst thing you can do with kids is corner them. So if you know what they did, but you say to them now, where's the candy bar that I left in here? And and you corner them and you say, well, what do you think that is? And you ask them 5 questions, all of which inspire a lie. You just trained them to lie. And if you keep that up for 10 years, you'll have an accomplished liar when they're age 15. And that's not what you want. So the deal is if you know what they did and they took the candy bar and they ate it, there's no doubt about it. You just consequence them for that. Second thing is don't treat lying as if it were the equivalent of homicide or adultery.
Sure.
Because a lot of parents really have a cow when a kid lies. What kind of family life are we going to have? We can't talk to each other. We can't trust each other and all that. 90% of 4-year-olds lie. I mean, it's a big thing to them. So you don't want to corner them. And if you don't know what happened, you accept what they say. If you find out later they lied, you can consequence that.
Okay. So is that then? So you consequence them when you know they're lying.
Yeah.
Is that a behavior that would just go away on its own as they get older if you continue to apply consistent consequences for lies?
Yes, it'll generally get better.
Okay.
If you handle it, same thing, calm and decisive and emotional and all that, it will generally get better as time goes by. The other thing I didn't mention is, remember we said the kids are lying to get out of trouble. I gave the example of the homework. Okay, well, take that homework example. What else do we need to do? We need a system for getting the homework done so the kid doesn't feel pressured to lie. So maybe we need an assignment sheet. Maybe we have a way of checking it after they show it to you and you look at it and you have a way of praising them for doing it and checking them out. You're done, good luck, and all that kind of stuff. But since kids are lying about certain kind of misbehaviors, a lot of the time we want to solve the misbehavior problem, if that makes sense.
Got it. So not just the demanding part, but also the warm and supportive part of parenting. How do you help them be successful?
That's right.
Okay, great. My biggest parenting challenge is in transitions with my kids, particularly morning routine, getting out the door as I work to, and evening routine, eating a full meal before leaving the table to play.
Okay, so we got morning, getting up and out, and eating. And these are 2 of our big chapters in 1, 2, 3 Magic. So let's talk about getting up and out. If you have kids who are under age 9, excuse me, what you can use a combination of a kitchen timer. You can use charting with artificial reinforcers, which means you can have a point system for a while that rewards them for doing well. You also want to do what I was talking about before, and that's set up a morning routine. And so you have a time when they get up, but you rehearse this at other times than a real morning. And when you rehearse it, you praise them. Wow, look how you're getting dressed and all this kind of stuff. You can have a deal where, they don't eat breakfast till they have their book bag together and their clothes on. You set up things like that. So you get this whole morning routine that you have down, well, and you rehearse it. And then that makes it a whole lot easier in the morning when it is time to do it. And what you want to do with your routine too, is you want to have an emphasis on the kids doing more and more on their own independently. And you put that on your chart. If you're doing it on your own without being reminded by mom or dad, that's real critical. Then you're going to phase out that chart. gradually. So your positive reinforcement is going to keep them going. If you're talking about eating in the evening, you also want a routine for evening. I mean, we used to have in our house, for example, a deal that if we have 4 things for a meal, meat, a protein, a starch, a salad, and a vegetable. If you eat 3 out of the 4, you can have your dessert and then you can go play.
Gotcha.
It was a routine. Because what we want to avoid is this thing about, we're going to sit here for 2 hours if that's what it takes for you to eat your broccoli. You want to cause an eating disorder, that's a good way to do it. And so we don't want to do that. So we want a routine for eating that you can use, every single night. Again, with the emphasis being more and more on their being independent as time goes by. The last thing in the world we want is a conflictual dinner time.
Yeah. So, yes. Not a whole lot of fun.
And that's not testing and manipulation we're talking about. Right. I mean, it could be involved in there, but this is like getting the job done. This is compliance with, positive behavior.
Got it. Great. How do you deal with a whining voice that seems to be my 3-year-old default voice lately? We ignore it, but it continues. # send help.
Well, I'll give you another. I talked about whining before. I mean about counting. Counting is a good way, and you can certainly count a 3-year-old. Another way of doing it is you can do prior to whining, to counting. You can say, I want you to use your big girl voice. But if you're going to use that, only say that once. You can say, I want you to use your big girl voice, otherwise we're going to count. And so stay calm, and she uses the big girl voice. Thank you very much, I appreciate it, and the issue is settled. She doesn't use the big girl voice. You don't say, I asked you to use your big girl voice. What is the matter with you? Now we're taken off into the, emotional hysteria. So she doesn't do it, say, honey, that's 1. And then you do it. But whining, it tends to engage parents in a way that they get into it, if you know what I mean. So intensely that it's real hard to think clearly. So do the counting. The counting will shut it off so fast you won't believe it.
It's almost like a high-pitched whine. Like if you've ever seen a sci-fi movie and they turn on that noise and suddenly nobody can function anymore, that's what my 4-year-old likes.
And that's one where people say, how do these kids come up with this idea? And that's why I said I think it's evolutionary.
Yeah.
I think kids from a bazillion years back, and monkeys probably did it too, and probably all kinds of fish, I don't know, but they learned how to whine at their parents to get their way.
It's very effective. Okay, how do you deal with combative, argumentative teenagers? I have a teenager who answers questions with a question or intentionally tries to argue. In parentheses, typical teen.
Yeah, typical teen. Well, the scene I often talk about with teens is one that illustrates what I call the adolescent snub. And I'll just give you an example, and I hope it applies to this question. But you're sitting at dinner with your 16-year-old son, and it's been a school day. You've had a work day, and your son's been at school. You say to your son, how was your day? And he says, fine. And you say, what did you do? And he says, nothing. And so you're not going to give up. So now dad gets involved, and dad says, well, did you have social studies? He says, yes. And you say, what did you do in social studies? He says, we didn't do nothing in social studies. So that's called the adolescent snub. And the adolescent snub, and part of this question and part of dealing with teens, I think at least 50%, is understanding the snub and not taking it personally. That scene that I just described is happening in about 20 million American families every day, and it is perfectly normal. And here's what's going on. Your teenager is translating your question. Remember, he's 16 now. He's translating your question, how was your day? And he's translating it into this question. Did you, my son, screw up anything today that I need to know about?
Oh, no.
He is. And he's thinking, they're checking up on me. They want to make sure I'm not taking drugs, getting somebody pregnant, doing all these bad things and all that. And he's saying, I'm not playing that game. I don't need you guys anymore. Fine, nothing. So one of my suggestions is, we said before, never ask the 2 stupidest questions. Never ask this one stupid question with adolescents at the dinner table, how was your day? Because they will take it the wrong way. And you are checking up on them, I think. Yeah, so people say, what's the alternative? I'll give you two alternatives. One is you could talk about politics if you wanted to. And the focus is not on them. They do not feel evaluated. And sometimes an even better alternative is to talk about yourself and something that went wrong for you during the day. You give them the chance to be supportive and understanding and diagnose you if they want, but not, vice versa. So I don't know if that applies to that question, but I'm hoping that it may kind of answer it. So don't take it as an insult. They are pulling away from you. That's what they're supposed to be doing. I bet you anything that's what you were doing when you were, not you necessarily, but
oh no, definitely me. Yeah.
and very fair.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So two great alternative conversation starters there. If you have 3 kids, how do you make sure they all feel like they're heard or get enough time with a parent? Okay, I think that's a separate question. Okay, so if you have 3 kids, how do you make sure they all feel like they're heard or they get enough time with their parent?
Yeah, well, now you're getting into something that's dear to my heart, and this is not testing and manipulation either related, I don't think, but I think the most potent form of human bonding is one-on-one. So, people in this country, they drive me crazy, actually. This is going to sound sacrilegious, so I apologize. They are so big on family fun. If we all would just sit down at the end of the day and eat together, and have this warm family bonding, drug abuse would disappear, academic achievement would skyrocket, and teen pregnancy would vanish. And so then they get together, and it's not that much fun. Because there is competition, just like the question implies. So I'm not saying don't do your family fun stuff, but what I am saying is do the one-on-one stuff. And I think that's implied in the question too.
Yeah.
The most important kind of bonding is one-on-one, one parent and one kid together in the same place, enjoying the same thing with nobody else there. I will guarantee you there is no 16-year-old kid, male or female, in the world that's going to talk to you about drugs or sex in the front seat of the car with their 8-year-old brother or sister in the back seat. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
So
yeah, fair.
So do the one-on-one on a regular basis. The kids appreciate it. Sometimes the parents will say, "What can I do with the kid? I don't have that much in common." And here's my favorite: a movie and food.
Mm-hmm.
And here's my second favorite. I just did this with the grandkids. I said, pick your favorite song. I want you to go on the computer and print it out for me. And I'm going to read it. I'm not going to sing it. I'm going to read it, and I want you to explain the lyrics to me. And you listen sympathetically as they try and explain the lyrics of, you want to get to know them?
Yeah.
That's one way to do it.
I don't think I want my 4-year-old to explain Old Town Road to me, but
this is more teenager. Yeah.
So if the child becomes clingy when you're reprimanding them, what would you encourage someone to do in that situation with a child who's aged around 5 or 6?
And they're becoming clingy.
They get clingy when you reprimand them.
Yeah, I would first of all recommend using counting rather than lecturing.
Mm-hmm.
So if you get into a reprimand and that reprimand is a lecture, I would bet you they already know what you're going to say because you've said it many times before. Mm-hmm. And I think they are embarrassed and maybe even humiliated by that. Now, your goal is to discipline. That means to train. That doesn't mean to humiliate. Mm-hmm. And this may be off base here, but I would keep it short and sweet and ask yourself the question, does this kid really need a lecture on this, or could they give the lecture to me if I ask them, and tell me everything that I'm going to tell them? That's why I like counting so much. If it's a misbehavior, you say that's one, or you say something very briefly. And that's another option here, is do your reprimand, but do it not in a hostile way, and keep it short and sweet, and then act as if nothing had happened and go on from there.
Sure. Because usually the kids know that they've done something wrong, right? Like it's not going to be a surprise that they're getting reprimanded or counted.
Yeah, people say all the time to me, how are they supposed to know what's right and wrong if you don't tell them? Well, excuse me, but you probably told them about 125 times already at this stage of their life. Plus, they see television, they see movies, they read books. They're getting the moral story from a whole lot of different angles. And it's not like you are the sole teacher. Thank God.
Right. Okay, so then on the flip side of reprimands, what are some no-nos for rewarding kids? What are some things that you should not do when rewarding a child?
It's a good question. One of the things you don't want to do when rewarding, and I have nothing against rewarding, But for just say starting from scratch, you don't want to reward things that have a natural intrinsic reinforcement built into them.
Okay.
It's not like athletic activities or participation in sports. If you have somebody who's, say my granddaughter's on the volleyball team, I'm not going to reward her with something else other than praise or recognition, because she's got the reward of being with the other teams, the reward of the competition, the satisfaction doing it, and all kinds of stuff. Where we like to use rewards that are what I call artificial, like points or money or special activities and that kind of stuff. It's where you have a child maybe that has ADHD and they're struggling with homework and they need that extra motivational boost. Then what I want to do is then I will use some rewards. Now, I could do charting, and I could do charting with no artificial reinforcers, just as a recognition. That's fine for anything, I think. But if it's a kid who really has a hard time with something, then I will add these artificials. And then what I want to do is phase them out gradually over time. So we kind of get the behavior going, combination with the artificial reinforcers, the recognition and praise, and then gradually phase out the artificials and phase down the praise, but don't eliminate it. And that's our strategy. But good, it's a good question.
Sure. Yeah. So kind of related to that, then, this is a conversation we have in my house a lot. When it comes to kids doing chores, so you talked about when a kid is struggling with something, so say a child who has ADHD struggling to kind of get through their homework, but what if you have children and you just want them to do their chores around the house and they don't want to do them? We have conversations, well, do you offer them an allowance? Do you offer them rewards for doing chores? Or do you just say, you're part of the family, this is what you should be doing to help the family?
Yeah, I have two things. One is I have no problem with including chores as part of allowance. I think allowance, you can start around age 5, and I think half of it should be just given to the kid because they're part of the family. But half of it could also be given to them for completing their chores. The other thing I think is important, and you may have heard me say this before, is if you want to give them chores, give them some meaningful chores. I don't consider taking out the garbage and cleaning your room meaningful chores. We give kids chores that they consider, I don't know what word to use, but it's not complicated.
Busy work.
Busy work is a good word. They
Yeah.
don't consider that meaningful. And what I do consider meaningful is, what if you had that kid who was 10 years old and they cooked a 4-course dinner for the entire family on a weekday night when you had worked all day and your husband had worked all day and you're coming home and this 10-year-old prepares the whole meal. Now that's meaningful. That's more meaningful than cleaning the garbage and stuff. So I think in the United States, we give the kids crap to do, and then that's what word I was going to say before, but we give them this stuff to do, and then we get mad at them because they don't want to do the crap. Well, kids, especially teenagers, are among some of the most idealistic humans on the planet. They do want to contribute, but they want to do it in a meaningful way.
Sure.
So take a chance. People say, I can't have them in the kitchen because the high temperatures and the knives. Train them. You train your 10-year-old not to cut their finger off and how to regulate the gas stove.
Sure.
So anyway, that's a pet peeve of mine.
All right, I think we have time for one more question here. My challenge is getting my 6-year-old to bed. My 6-year-old shares a bedroom with my 4-year-old and my 15-year-old. And the 6-year-old will do things that set off the 4-year-old. This question's coming from Shannon. So we've got 3 kids in one room, a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 15-year-old. And the 6-year-old is doing things to kind of irritate the 4-year-old around bedtime. So how would you suggest handling that? That's a lot of kids at a transition time.
It is.
When mom is probably ready to just have everybody be quietly in bed and get their rest for the next day.
Yeah, and it's tough because you got different ages there, and you may have different bedtimes. I mean, 4-year-old and 16-year-old can go to bed at different times. They both need a lot of sleep, but they can both go to bed at different times. I would try a couple of things. One is I would consider having a meeting with the 2 older kids about how can you help me, come up with some way of dealing with this. So there'll be the 6-year-old and the 16-year-old.
6-year-old and a 15-year-old are the
15-year-old,
two
yeah.
older ones. The
Right.
youngest is 4.
Yeah. How could we do it? So we involve the kids because they're a little older, and I think that might work. I would still do the basic framework of a basic bedtime method like we do with everybody, maybe a story or whatever. And I would also consider charting. Now, the 4-year-old's a little young for charting, but maybe not. You could chart everybody where they get this artificial reinforcement we talked about before, and they get a reward for handling bedtime well. And the tricky thing about charting for bedtime is you can't do the reward till the next day.
Right.
You can't do it and wake them up. Hey, you did such a good job getting ready for it, and then you wake them up. So I would do that. I'd use a little family meeting in there, and then kind of tune it up over period of time. Also, stick a floor fan in there. I love floor fans. I think they cover up a lot of noises that keep kids awake, and I think they have a soothing, the white noise kind of effect that can sometimes help put kids to sleep.
Okay, terrific. So some soothing noises, some good routines, conversation with the older ones.
Yeah.
To try and get all that corralled.
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. Well, that's all that we've got time for today. Thank you guys so much for joining us to talk about the 6 biggest ways that kids push back and what you can do about it. I hope this has been valuable for you. You'll be getting an email from us in the next couple hours with a link to the replay as well as a free downloadable cheat sheet. If you had questions that we didn't get a chance to answer today, you can visit us at 123magic.com, and at the very top of the website, you'll see a little bar that says Ask Dr. Phelan, and that'll take you to a page where you can submit your questions and get those answered. Thank you again for joining us, and have a great day.